Hello, Jennifer. It's such an honor to have you as a guest on the Paleo Gardening Expert Interview segment. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jennifer Robbins is the creator of the recipe blog Predominantly Paleo and the author of the cookbook Down South Paleo with 2 new books on the way for the new year. And one of those is a cookbook for paleo kids, and the other one is The New Yiddish Kitchen. So, Jennifer, how would you explain all that you do to anyone unfamiliar with your work?
I like to recreate foods that are comforting and things that people crave. So when you give up grain and you give up gluten and you give up dairy and refined sugar and legumes, it feels in the beginning like you're giving up more than you still have on your list to eat. And I know firsthand from my own experience that it can be a little daunting and it can feel like, your options are so slim. And so when I first started writing recipes, I really wanted to recreate all the things that I love to eat and put those back into the kitchens of people who are transitioning their lifestyle so that it doesn't have to feel like you're missing out and it doesn't have to feel like you're different from everybody or left out or can't eat foods at a party or things like that, because food's really social and emotional. And so I wanted to make sure that I could keep some of those things that make people really happy. So most of my work, I would say, is not just recreating, but creating recipes and foods that make people feel good emotionally and physically.
Yeah, that is a really big part of it, because if you feel like there's nothing to eat, then you don't stay on the diet long. You
exactly
fall back into the other world. So everyone has a unique story of how they regain their health in the paleo world. Could you tell me more about your journey to health?
Sure. I first started getting sick in my 20s, and I had a lot of panic attacks and just didn't feel well. I didn't really know exactly what was going on. I had never had panic before. I was always a really driven kind of type A personality, lots of energy. I had danced all my life as a ballet dancer, and so it kind of caught me off guard. But it started with that and just kind of progressed over the years. So it's, was panic for a while and then kind of leveled out, and I felt okay, but never great again. And then I had my first 2 children, and after that I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, thyroid disease, and it just kind of kept plummeting where I'd have periods of stability, but over the long haul I was getting worse and worse. And then after my 3rd baby was born in 2011, I had a major crash, and I really didn't know what was going on. I didn't know if it was the thyroid stuff, if it was hormones, postpartum, just kind of off balance, but I kept getting sicker, and I eventually became homebound and bedbound frequently. I couldn't drive because I had so many neurological symptoms that I'd feel lost, or I'd have really bad vertigo, brain swelling, migraines, and I got to the point where I didn't feel safe even driving my kids to preschool. So that is kind of when I started seeing a bunch of different specialists, integrative, holistic, acupuncture, you name it, I tried it. And I was diagnosed with Lyme disease, co-infections, chronic viruses like Epstein-Barr, which over 90% of the population is exposed to during childhood. But for some of us, we hold on to those viruses when we become chronically ill. The viruses can flare and cause things like chronic fatigue syndrome. So I had 50 to 100 different symptoms, over 20 different diagnoses, but ultimately I was treated for Lyme disease very aggressively with the traditional oral antibiotics, some injectable antibiotics, supplements, detox, all of it. I basically really did try it all. And I was gluten-free after I had been diagnosed with the Hashimoto's in 2008, but I had not taken my diet any further than that. And as most people know who are gluten-free or grain-free, you can eat gluten-free and not be healthy at all. You can eat gluten-free pizza and cookies and brownies and buy store-bought packaged goods that are still loaded with sugar and all sorts of things. So I really had to take a look at what I was putting into my body, and when the traditional Lyme treatment did not work at all for me, I continued to get worse. And this was over a year that I stayed on aggressive treatment. And so I thought, oh, this is part of the deal. You get worse before you get better. And I kept telling myself that because I really needed to believe that pumping my body full of all these chemicals had an end result that was favorable. And I just wasn't seeing it. I wasn't making any baby steps at all. And so ultimately I went off of antibiotics, and I decided that I needed to find ways to rebuild my immune system. And the first thing I looked at was diet. And what am I not eating, and what am I eating that I shouldn't, and where are some inflammatory foods that might still be lingering, even though I thought I was doing okay because I was gluten-free and following all of those kind of guidelines. So I kept coming across paleo, and it was a flag for me that I needed to really take a look at what kind of nutrients I was getting, not just what I was avoiding, like gluten, but am I getting the good stuff? Am I getting enough vegetables, micronutrients? Am I really focusing on nutrition and not just avoidance of one protein in grains? So I gave up the remaining grains and very hesitantly and reluctantly gave up dairy, which was by far the hardest for me because I was in denial for years that I had a problem with dairy, mostly because I didn't have any GI issues. So I kept eating it, and I said, I can handle dairy. I don't have a problem with this. And I couldn't. I really couldn't. And so I finally had to give it up. And slowly over the months, I did make some progress, and I still say that I'm a work in progress because I think to rebuild an entire immune system is a big commitment, and it takes a long time. But I'm getting there. I have much more of a life than I did a few years ago, and I can finally travel again and write books and run a blog and be a stay-at-home mom to my 3 kiddos. So it definitely has made a huge impact on my health.
Wow, that's quite a journey that you had. I also went gluten-free. We went 20 years ago gluten-free, and I had to kick the dairy too. I could digest it, but I was reacting to the proteins in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, well, I'm glad you're on the path to health. That's really awesome.
Thank you.
So how has your journey to health affected the way that you help others?
I've always sort of been wired to want to help others. My undergraduate degree was in psychology, and I always thought I'd go into counseling of some sort, and then I ended up with a master's in human relations. So I do like the people part of just connecting. But then when you throw in a health crisis, I think it really makes you even more empathetic towards others. And so when I first started the blog, I didn't even know that it was going to help others. I mean, it's always a great concept to be able to, but it was so small at the time, and there were already so many established paleo bloggers. It really wasn't necessarily a goal. But I set it up so that I could go back and find recipes and stuff like that. And so when I took it to social media, which I'm coming up on my 2-year anniversary this month, I saw how much of a need there was in the community and outside the community of paleo people who just really needed help. I mean, even people who have unexplained symptoms and they're just crying for help. They need some direction. And obviously I'm not a healthcare provider, so I can't provide specific medical advice. But when it comes to food, some people just need a little hand-holding, and they just need to be told that even if you give up your favorite foods that you think you can never live without, the payoff is so great that the way that you feel afterwards, you won't miss them the same way that you think that you will before you give them up. So I think that just having suffered my own story really makes me want to help people more than ever, and it probably makes me a little bit more patient in understanding that it's so complex, that, you know, diet is one aspect, lifestyle is one aspect, you know, Western medicine is one aspect because it still has a place as well. And so to reconcile all of those things is a really difficult process, and especially when you are knee-deep in mud trying to pull yourself out and you feel terrible, sometimes you really just need somebody to say, let me help pick this apart for you. And I feel like that is the opportunity that I've been given, is to connect with readers who really have no idea what to do next. And because I can see a little bit more clearly now, being on the other side of the worst, I have a gift that I can give them, knowing that it can be okay and you can come out of this. And I consider myself a success story in terms of healing, and people really, really, really need to see that, because I know at my worst, I knew I was dying, and I didn't know how to accept that because I wasn't ready and I wanted to fight, but then I didn't have fight some days. And so I know exactly what that feels like. And so I do think that's an advantage. And as my friend says, you know, turn your dragon into your gift so that you can use it to help other people, even though it was a terrible experience to live through. It does give you an advantage to help others. So that's exactly what I'm trying to do.
That's great. I know people, they just need somebody to hold their hand till they get over the hard part, and then they're on their way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So on your blog, you mentioned that not long ago you didn't even know how to boil water. So can you tell me more about your transformation into a cookbook writer?
It's kind of a funny story. When I met my now husband 13 years ago or whatever it was, I really did not know how to cook. And I had been, you know, the college student who basically made frozen meals or ate out or did very simple things in the kitchen. And I really wanted to make him a home-cooked meal. We're a military family, so at the time he was away from family, and I kind of wanted to bring, you know, a taste of home to him, except that I had no idea how to do that. And so the first meal I ever tried to make him was beef stew in a crock pot, which you really can't mess up, right? Except that I did, because I basically dumped a ton of water and some meat and vegetables, and I expected it to thicken into beef stew. And when I opened the lid, you know, 8 hours later or whatever it was, right before he was coming home from work, I basically burst into tears and was like, this is terrible. It's just water with meat and vegetables. It's barely even soup. This, you know, there was no seasoning that was going to make it save the meal or anything. And so I had to call one of his neighbors, because we live in different cities, and have her help me save it with cornstarch, which I used at the time. And so I ran across the street, grabbed this cornstarch, and had no idea how to make a slurry. So I dumped it into the beef stew, and then I had clumpy beef and water and vegetables. And so anyway, I look back now and I'm like, okay, I really had a long way to go before I even had a clue. But I think when I got sick, I realized, okay, I really have to learn. I mean, I had made meals by that point, because this was after we had children and everything. But it still was more, you know, simple, like open a jar of tomato sauce and boil some gluten-free noodles. And I really didn't understand cooking from scratch or baking from scratch, and certainly not writing recipes, but I had to learn. I feel like if I wanted to be satisfied, with the foods that I was eating, I needed to figure out how to make them the right way with the right ingredients, and so I just dove in, and I used other paleo blogs as as kind of a set of guidelines to learn the ropes, and then off I went and started building from there. Because I have the background in the creative arts, I feel like writing recipes really satisfies that need to create, and so it's a good fit for me, I guess. I just didn't realize that it was even a possibility because I was so bad at it. I never would have thought that anybody would want to make food that I created, and but now that I see how it all fits together, using that part of your brain to pull together flavors and textures that you find desirable, it does make sense, but it was quite a road to get there.
Sounds like it. So did you cook much in the traditional American diet stuff, or did you just start cooking just in paleo?
I cooked a little bit standard American diet stuff, like, the taco soup in the crock pot where you open up 6 different cans and dump it all in and brown your meat and put in some taco seasoning, that kind of thing. I would say they were still very simple recipes, and I always had to follow somebody else's recipe in order to get it done. I never really thought about making my own things, even when I was eating, the full spectrum of foods. I didn't think I was wired for that. And now I feel like it's a great outlet, and it's very cathartic for me. But yeah, it was a very long and slow process.
Well, I'm glad you made it. In many of your baked good recipes, you use yucca dough. How did you discover this unique ingredient for paleo baking?
When I was really kind of diving into opening myself up to try new things, I'd walk through the produce department and just kind of look at things, like, oh, star fruit, I've never tried that before, or whatever it was. And I saw this really ugly root, which is the yucca root, also known as cassava. And I felt like I needed to take it home and try something with it. And I had, because living in D.C., you've got a lot of different ethnic restaurants around. So I had, at the Peruvian chicken places, they have yucca fries, but I had never had anything beyond that. So I took this root home, and I kind of started looking up on the internet, what can I make with this? And I had seen a few different things where you can grate it, and there's different breads you can make, like pan de yuca has cheese in it, so it's a bread, but I knew I couldn't make that because of the cheese. So I don't really know how I got from A to Z, to be honest. I joke that it was like divine intervention, that I felt like I should boil it, blend it, add some fat, add a little coconut flour, and it just kind of came to be. And so once I figured out how to do that, I realized, oh my gosh, this, because it doesn't take eggs, is suitable for the autoimmune protocol. And so I started thinking of all the different ways that you can take this dough and make it into something else. And it really became very exciting for me, because it was the first thing that I felt like I was really contributing to the paleo community. Otherwise, a lot of the other things have been done and done very well. And so this one was like, a personal breakthrough for me. Like, oh my gosh, what can I do? You know, I can make empanadas and I can make pizza crust and all these different things. And it's the coolest part has been to watch what other people come up with. So you give them, you know, this foundation and then off they go. And I've seen some really, really cool creations from the yucca dough. And when people tag me in posts and say, like, look what I made with your dough, it's just really, that to me is really fulfilling and exciting that, you know, other people are using it to make creations too. So yeah, it's been fun with that stuff.
Yeah, that does sound like fun. I struggle with eggs as well, so I'm going to give this a try because I love to play in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's see what we can create. Fun. Thank you.
Yes.
So what is your typical creative process for writing a cookbook?
I usually will start with whatever the concept is. So like my first book, Down South Paleo, I really wanted to create or recreate all the Southern recipes that I grew up with. Being from Texas, I have a very strong tie to my motherland. And I really wanted to make all the things that were comforting to me. And in the same note, I wanted to help people who eat that way, traditional Southern foods, realize that they can eat them and not give them up forever, but you can clean them up and use better oils and better flours and, you know, kind of make them healthier versions of the traditional. So that one was kind of an easy concept for me because it was so close to my heart and my upbringing. And then I actually stayed up one night on the phone with a friend of mine, a childhood friend of mine, and we basically nailed down the table of contents in one night because there were so many things that were just like, oh, well, you have to have fried chicken. Well, then you have to have, you know, collard greens, and you have to have tortillas. And so one thing just led to another, and that was the easy part. Then I had to actually create all of them. Of course, that takes a lot more effort and time and flops in the kitchen where you've got to dump them, which I always feel bad wasting ingredients, but it's kind of part of the process sometimes if it really turns out that bad. I always start with the table of contents, and usually I can do that in, you know, a few hours or a day. The ideas are usually there. It's more the creating of the recipes that can be more challenging. But yeah, so then the second book, The New Yiddish Kitchen, I wrote with a co-author, Simone, of Zen Belly, and she is a Jewish caterer in a paleo caterer in San Francisco. So we had become friends through the community, and we actually wrote Yiddish Kitchen as an ebook because we started realizing that there were not a lot of traditional Jewish recipes in the paleo community, which is a little bit ironic because a lot of Jewish people have gluten and dairy intolerances. And so the more we thought about it, we thought, you know what, we really need to create this. And so that's where our bagel recipe came from, which is about as authentic as you can get other than eating the real gluten-filled version. So, you know, we joke that the gluten-free frozen bagels at the store leave a lot to be desired. And so the bagel recipe for us was a real breakthrough in bringing back some of those traditional Jewish foods that people grew up on. And so we put that as an ebook, and then we ended up pitching it to my publisher, and they liked it. They liked the idea. And so we turned that ebook into double the size and that is the one coming out in just a few weeks on March 8th. And so we're really excited about that one. It's got recipes for every Jewish holiday, and it's not necessarily written from a religious perspective as much as a cultural perspective, where you've got matzo ball soup and those comfort foods that, you know, people really enjoy eating. And so that is book number 2. And for us, it was a collaborative effort, but it was pretty, I would say that was a pretty organic flow to come up with those recipes too, because there's really a lot of culturally Jewish recipes that are out there, because some of them are, you know, more American-based, some are Israeli-based. So there's over 100 recipes in that one too, and we're really excited to share that. So those are those 2 books, and then the kid book, that was, you know, born right from me being a mom and knowing that sometimes kids are really hard to please. So writing that book was like, okay, how are we going to get these kids to eat a standard American diet, to eat real whole foods, when I call them like the gray foods or the tan foods. You know, some kids, like, they don't go beyond the tan foods, like chicken nuggets and sandwiches and stuff like that. So I'm like, how do I get kids who only eat tan foods to eat real food again? And because a lot of babies, you know, as their first foods, they'll eat all sorts of vegetables and fruits and meats and stuff, and then sometimes they evolve to these really picky eaters who now are down to 2 or 3 things that they'll eat regularly. So I really wanted to help the standard American family who really does want to instill healthier habits in their children, but maybe doesn't know how, or maybe their kids are so picky, they're like, how in the world am I going to get them off of eating Happy Meals to eating kale? And it's a difficult transition if you're not already there. And so because my kids also had, you know, cheese crackers when they were little and stuff like that, I felt like I could maybe help other families make that transition. And so that was kind of the inspiration for that book that'll be out next fall.
I think that's a really great idea, because it's really hard. Like I said, if the kid is ingrained in the style of eating, and you try to change them over into something else. We did the gluten-free thing when the boys were 5, so they weren't too old when we switched them on that one. And then when we went paleo 3 years ago, 2 of my kids are eating it and 1 is not. So it's like, okay, we got 2 out of 3.
Yeah.
Pretty good. So busy weeknight dinners can be a challenge for many paleo families. So what are some of the techniques that you use with your family to make an easy paleo dinner?
I would say one of my best tricks, I don't know if you want to call it a trick, it's not like I did anything to create it, but is the Instant Pot. Not to give them a brand plug or anything, but I am a huge fan, and it's an electric pressure cooker. I had never used a pressure cooker before, and I was scared to. And so when people first started talking about the Instant Pot, I was like, oh, yeah, no, that's not coming in my kitchen. In fact, when I first used it for the first time, I set it, like I plugged it in, and I put whatever I was making, secured the lid, and I made everybody leave the room. I said, we got to get out of this kitchen just in case anything goes wrong. And I shut the doors to the kitchen, and we left. We went to another part of the house. I'm like, if this blows up, I cannot kill somebody with it. I will never live that down. So, but it is so fast and efficient, and you can really throw just about anything in there, and you've got dinner. And so what's nice is on weeknights, you know, when you can't really spend hours, especially when there's 2 working parents or a single parent who works, it's too much to be, you know, on your feet in the kitchen for hours, and then you don't eat until 8 o'clock. And then if you have kids, that's basically bedtime on a school night for a lot of them. So with the Instant Pot, you can throw everything in. it's a great way to make things more cost effective because you can add extra veggies if you don't want to use a ton of meat, if you're trying to budget, use some homemade broth and you've got dinner, and it really, you can make it stretch for a couple days as much as you can make in that pot. So it's quick. You can make dinner in 30 minutes and you'll have tender meat. I've made pot roast in it in, a fraction of the time, all sorts of things. So that's one way. Of course, the slow cooker, which the Instant Pot has a slow cooker feature, but if you can't invest in an Instant Pot and you have a slow cooker, oh my gosh, use it. It's such a lifesaver. You can put it in before you leave in the morning. You come home, you have dinner. I love soups and stews, especially during the winter, but really even during the summer because, a slow cooker doesn't put off a lot of heat in the summer. So it's got that advantage too. So yeah, I mean, those two ways I feel like are a little more hands-free cooking for busy people, and I think they're cost-effective too because of all the veggies you can throw in there. You don't have to have a meat-heavy diet, which tends to be a little more expensive. So I think those are really useful tools.
Yeah, do you have recipes on your website for those tools?
I do, and I have roundups for both the Instant Pot and slow cooker paleo recipes. So both roundups have a list of links. So it includes, my recipes and then some from other great paleo bloggers in the community too. So yeah, they're all there, lots of them.
That's great because I agree. Those are two ways to make a meal quickly. I've had a pressure cooker since, been running it for 30 years. But you know what? I still leave the room when it's on. It's like, okay, I'm going to be on this side of the kitchen while that thing's going.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I guess my grandmother had one blow on her, but what happens is the safety hole pops open, and all the soup that's in the pot ends up on the ceiling.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, it's funny. But, yeah, I don't stay in the room when it's on.
Funny.
Okay. So do you have any recommendations for teaching your kids the value of good whole foods?
My kids are old enough that other than the youngest one, they actually remember when I was sick. And I use that as an example. And I don't use it as a scare tactic, but more of, a way to educate them. So that's one thing, and that's not something that everybody would do or can do because not everybody's sick to start with. But I do talk about the importance of nutrition and how, do you remember when mommy was sick and I couldn't leave the house or go do things with you very often, and now I feel so much better because I've really focused. And we talk about it regularly. So, if they're tempted by something when we're out, which luckily doesn't happen as often anymore, I just talk to them about why that's not really a good choice. And they still get treats. I don't, want anybody to think that I'm so strict or that they don't get indulgences, but I always keep them gluten-free. That's one thing that I will not falter on, and I'd rather make them a gluten-free treat at home than buy one out. But even if we buy one out, I just want to look for the best ingredients possible and let them do that. So they get a small treat after dinner, and I do use food as a reward to a degree. It's not anything big. Sometimes it's just, a tablespoon of dairy-free dark chocolate. But for me, it encourages them to eat what's at the dinner table, and they don't get separate meals. I give them exactly what we eat for dinner as parents, and I've never really catered to them. I know that's hard for some people, but I don't give options. This is for dinner, and they can tell me that they don't like it, and that's fine. If there's something that's really not their taste, maybe it's a little too spicy or whatever it is, that's fine, and I encourage them to be honest with me, but I do tell them this is what's for dinner. So if you're hungry, you'll eat it. And if you want, your square of dark chocolate or whatever it is, then you'll eat it. And there's no wiggle room around that. But yeah, I just think we need to talk to our kids more instead of caving in all the time or, just getting frustrated and throwing in the towel. Like, they are responsive. They hear what you're saying a lot of the time. And if you start when they're younger and really educate, like, these are the building blocks of your body. These make us strong and healthy. And do you remember how your friend so-and-so was sick last week and you didn't get it? Maybe these foods really help support your immune system so that you didn't have to get sick. Things like that. So I really feel like education is the utmost importance and something that you can do even when they're little. I always told my kids that gluten gave them tummy aches, and only 1 out of the 3 really even had digestive issues from gluten. The others were, they had other symptoms, but that was the easiest way to translate to them why they weren't getting goldfish crackers. And I noticed that by 3 years old, each one of them, even when they'd go to a friend's house, if I was there on a play date or something, I'd hear them say, well, is this snack gluten-free? And I don't even think they totally understood it, but they understood enough to know this is something that I have to avoid. So for me, it's just, instilling those habits and talking about it and not making it be a mystery or, not making them feel like they're missing out on something, because kids will inevitably want to fit in with their friends if they feel like they're really different or they're not getting something or they're being left out. That's where the problems come in. So for me, it's, finding ways to give them things that they still can feel like are kid foods, and that's part of the kids cookbook. Making those foods so that you don't feel left out. You still get your favorite crackers or cookies or treats or whatever they are, and just talking regularly about the importance of why we do this.
Yeah, that's so important I believe, that the education and helping them to make their choices. So on Paleo Gardening, our mission is to help make the paleo lifestyle more affordable. How would you recommend our listeners enjoy a more affordable paleo diet?
I think there's a few ways to do that. One is, of course, supporting local farmers markets. I think sometimes, it can be more expensive. There are other ways to cut back, though. If people are used to getting a $4 coffee every morning, that's really kind of an indulgence. So if you start trimming back other areas, you can open up a little more of your budget to buy the ingredients that are most important. So, like, for me, the source of my meat and eggs are probably my most important, and then I give a little more wiggle room on vegetables, so I can try to work around that. I'm at the point now where I can't get away with, using 1 pound of meat so much anymore, but if I want to try, I do things like make a soup or a stew where you can make 1 pound of meat count more. If you make homemade broth versus buying it at the store, one thing I like to do is make, like in the slow cooker, I make a rotisserie chicken. I throw my whole bird in there. And so then after the chicken, after you pull the cooked chicken off, leave the bones in there and make your broth. And you can make repeated batches of broth until your bones are really brittle. So if you think about how many ounces of broth you can make from an original whole chicken, you've got a meal there, and then you've got lots of cups of broth to follow up after that. So, try to stretch those types of things too, where you're not tossing the bones after you eat the meat. And then use lots of vegetables. You can use things like sweet potatoes, which are starchy and help fill you up. You can use yucca. those starches in a soup or a stew will help keep it filling, and they're very inexpensive. And so if you throw more veggies into things like that, then you can use less meat, which tends to be more expensive. You can use your homemade bone broth, and then you've got a meal that serves quite a few people and is satisfying too.
Nice. Yeah, those are all good ideas. So your work has helped so many people, and there are many of us who would like to see you continue. So how can anyone listening stay involved with your work?
I am on all social media, so I'm on Facebook and Instagram, Pinterest, and Twitter. I have the blog at predominantlypaleo.com, and I will respond to all emails, questions, blog comments, Facebook posts. I'm really interactive with my readers, and it's important to me to build more of a community than just a following. So I don't need to be a superstar. It's more important for us to all be involved and helping each other. So if you find me anywhere there, you'll see that I'm really interactive. If you have questions, please email me or comment, and I try to be really good about getting back to everybody. And then all 3 books are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold for those who are interested in seeing those.
I want to thank you for taking the time for joining me on the show today.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for having me.
For those of you listening, to learn more about Jennifer Robbins and her blog, Predominantly Paleo, you can click on the links in the description or by visiting predominantlypaleo.com. It was a pleasure to have you as a guest on the Paleo Gardening Expert Interview. I'd like you to have a great day.
Thank you.